Arma 3 is a tactical shooter, first-person shooter, or infantry combat simulator, whichever term tickles your fancy better, really. Modern Warfare Simulator is probably a more accurate group of words to describe it, even if it's not really a genre. In Arma 3, you play as a singular soldier that is sometimes in command of other soldiers. Your goal is to follow typical real-world military objectives in a highly realistic, at least in comparison to all the other war games on the market, war simulation, with all different kinds of variables influencing how things work and weighing you down to the capabilities of a real-life soldier instead of a super adrenaline-pumped super soldier that can jump out of a plane, shoot an enemy pilot with a pistol, and then take his plane mid-air, like in Battlefield or something else with an arcadey focus. Arma 3 has a huge modding base and mission editing capabilities along with regular DLC content coming out to support it to ensure you always have something to do. But mods and DLC aside, is Arma 3 worth your time or money? Well, let's start with the gameplay. As I said, the gameplay is highly realistic while it's still being fun. And that's what the whole Arma series is known for, being fun to play while also being as realistic as they can manage. Not aiming down your sight does not result in the shot curving off to the side and spinning around like a ballerina like in other shooters that think making all non-scoped shots miss 3 feet to the left is realistic. You can do pretty much anything you can imagine in a war here. You can fly a jet, a helicopter, be a co-pilot, drive a tank, be a gunner, drive a Humvee, fortify bases, build bases, lead squads, lead platoons, run around solo in the middle of a war zone with nothing but a pistol as a helicopter lands Russian soldiers behind you. The point of what I'm trying to say is that anything can happen in real war and will happen in Arma 3, and that's not scripted. All the mechanics are set up pretty solid, there's good support for everything, and there's so much detail. From zeroing your gun to manually calculating and firing artillery should the situation call for it, laying ambushes with explosives, and making intricate plans on your side's map that can affect entire operations if done right or wrong. How much your gun sways is probably the biggest con I can find in the mechanics as they are laid out, as it sways way too much. You'd think your character was constantly having a seizure, but even then you can adapt to it and things can work out just the way you want them to.
Rifleman, 75 meters, left flank. Nomad 1 to crossroads. AA threat neutralized. Over.
Outstanding, Nomad.
It's not game-breaking or anything like that. The bigger problems when it comes to Arma 3's gameplay are the same exact problems every other game in the series before it has had. The game's engine is clearly meant more for simulation than actual player gameplay. The controls are now, and always have been, through every iteration, clunky and just not what you would expect of a shooter. It feels more akin to the slowness and lack of precise control of a third-person melee brawler-styled game. Nothing about the real virtuality engine seems to allow smooth gameplay because no game ever made for it has ever been anything other than clunky to play. That being said, Arma 3 is probably the least clunky of any Arma title. However, this is offset by the bugs and level of graphical optimization, which I will get to later. For now, let's move on to story. Now, even I can admit no one's going to buy an Arma game for the story. Every Arma campaign has always been hopelessly buggy and unfinishable without restarting certain missions over and over again until the game finally works, while also combating the twitchy AI, which I will also cover shortly. Arma 3, however, puts a much larger emphasis on story than any other Arma game before it, and provides a 3-part campaign with a prologue to boot. It is the most narrative-driven of any Arma campaign that I have ever seen, with very guided objectives and very defined paths to complete them. They give it a far more lower-ranking military feel than the open sandboxy feel of previous campaigns. That's not to say the open world aspect is necessarily missing, it's certainly there. It's part of what allows almost anything to happen, even in scripted story missions. You know, like sometimes you're just in the wrong place at the wrong time and you only realize it after you see an enemy vehicle closing in 20 feet away from you with a mounted grenade launcher aimed right at you.
MRAP, 200 meters, right. Stay sharp. Contact, machine gunner.
The story here is easily the most engaging and interesting narrative I have ever seen in an Arma game. With the prologue included, you play as one of a few NATO soldiers, and just generally try to survive an enemy onslaught and then overcome their power. Some of the story moments are very easy to see coming, but many of them still hit just as hard and are really just the result of some unpredictable yet talented writing.
Waiting. No, fuck.
Golf 2-2 to Crossroads. We're under fire. Golf 2-2 gaining heavy fire from the... Golf 2-2, come in. Golf 2-2, respawn.
Crossroads, this is Nomad. Golf 2-2's down. AA fire from Point, Texas. Over.
Oh, God damn it, we hit that position hard. They must have just moved in. Nomad, we can't deploy air support with an active AA threat so close to the airbase. You need to secure that position. Good luck. Crossroads out.
I found all the main characters certainly engaging and was very sad when any of them died, and some of them can die very suddenly. There are some choices, of course, like in Arma 2 that affect certain outcomes in the end of the game, but thankfully nothing as tedious as collecting evidence of war crimes while on a timer to complete your mission. The campaign also features a sort of side quest mechanic during the second of 3 episodes called Adapt. You'll play basically on the defensive and using guerrilla tactics as enemy forces outnumber and outmatch you, and you can choose to try to even the odds by venturing out yourself or occasionally with a small squad to complete some optional objectives to acquire some static fixed weapons or other weapons that may certainly be superior to what you're using living in the woods and all. I never really touched it because it was such a temporary feature that you didn't really need, as you can get to the 3rd episode really quick, and by that point weapons and ammo are of no concern whatsoever. Overall, I'd certainly recommend the game's story, especially when you take into account the extra missions and DLC and user-created campaigns and missions you can buy and or just download respectively, but we haven't touched all there is to this game just yet. Let's make a note on the AI next. The AI of Arma 3 are like the AI of every other Arma game, extremely stupid and clunky but deadly. Sometimes you will feel completely safe where you are. No way they'll shoot me here, you think. I've been 50 yards away in plain sight before and they've missed every shot. And then BAM! You get one shot killed. Sometimes though it will help you because you'll be moving in on an objective. One of your AI gets shot in the back. And then he does a sudden 180, murders the attacker, and then flips back around completely unfazed.
Target neutralized.
Now the interface to control the AI hasn't really improved, and the AI haven't really improved either that I've seen, or at least noticeably. And that's another thing we'll talk about when we get to the bugs. Let's get production out of the way. So, released in 2013, Arma 3 has quite easily some of the most beautiful graphics I've ever seen in a video game, for as realistic and large of a setting as it is. Seriously, you can crank everything up so high. For 2013, this was easily revolutionary, and for 2017, it's still hardly rivaled in my opinion. Some AAA titles may be flashier in what they show you, but that's just because they cheap out in a lot of areas where Arma doesn't, such as map size and sheer amount of characters and units on the screen and all this stuff. However, that leads to one of my biggest cons about Arma. Arma is easily one of the most unoptimized games I have ever played in my entire life. I think only Day 1 Dying Light on PC can even compete with it. I have a GTX 1070 and an Intel 6700K, and both me and a friend with a much weaker AMD setup flew in a helicopter once getting about 27 FPS. Both of us had high-end settings on, but the game just kinda capped there for no reason when I clearly should have been getting more FPS than he was. In addition, it lags a lot sometimes out of the blue, but especially when zooming in through the scope or just zooming in normally. This creates the potential to really fuck you over during a fight, which with Arma's save system can be fatal to a half hour or more of your time, or can just generally unimmerse you and add to the already clunky nature of the game. So not only do the controls become clunky, but they also become unresponsive. And over 3 computers and a full gaming community of friends, I have found the setting that influences this more than anything is the view distance. It doesn't matter what your specs are. Going above 2,000 yards or so visibility is a death wish for your performance. Even there, it will regularly dip under 60 and into the 30s and 40s. It put me off from playing this game for years until finally I just gave up and realized no matter how many new computers with better parts or brand changes I got, the FPS stability and maximum would never improve, and believe me, it never will. The voice acting, however, is much better this time around. It can still be pretty garbage in some instances, but it's usually a higher quality than ever before in a base Arma game. Overall, when talking about the production of Arma 3, you have to appreciate that they did a lot more to improve this over Arma 2, especially in the campaign, where extremely epic scenes happen all the time without even needing a rendered cutscene to guide it.
Oh, fuck.
All units, status report. What the hell just happened? Somebody tell me what the fuck just blew up. Over.
Crossroads, it's Carrie. It looks like we've just lost all of them, sir. Over.
What do you mean, all of them, Corporal?
Our AA, Omicron Kilo, Starfire. I can see the fires from here.
This is Charlie 2-2. Confirmed. Over. Crossroads, this is Delta 3-1. We're on station. Orders? Over. I want all remaining AA platforms online now. Delta 3-1, divert to assist Charlie and Neokori. Over.
Crossroads, my whole unit's gone. What are my orders? Over.
You can link up with us, Corporal. Confirmed. Carrie, assist Delta with the defense. Out.
And now for the problem that has plagued the Arma series since its birth. The bugs. We are 4 years into this game's development. And yes, it is still being actively developed. Bug fixes are made, updates are added, reworks are done, and new DLC is created. Yet, there's some horrible bugs that have been here since day one and will likely never leave. Some of these bugs can be as simple as you load into a map and something weird happens graphically. They can also be as simple as a man's broken anatomy being a little oddly fucked up and potentially reminding you of some broken neck experiences you may or may not have encountered in Dead Island. Sometimes you open a door and the door pushes you into a crate and then suddenly you can't escape. Like, thanks game. Sometimes a man will just randomly be floating in the middle of the air. There's also an issue I had where I noticed the game doesn't really like multi-monitor setups. I had to turn off my second display, otherwise my FPS would maintain itself around 20 to 30 FPS, no matter what my settings were and no matter where I was in the game, even if I turned my visibility down to minimum. And sometimes, or maybe should I say, in every single game, you will experience at least one bug that prevents you from completing an official story mission, whether it be a lone mission or in the campaign. In Arma 3's case, this syndrome really thrives in the mission called Moral Fiber, one of the final missions of the game. This mission has just so many game-breaking bugs, it is unreal. The one I ran into about 4 times before just giving up entirely was that I had to get out of a car, follow my squad lead, and talk to some guy that's pinned down by the enemy. Problem is, the squad lead doesn't get out of the car. I tried turning all my mods off, turning on new ones, restarting, changing the mission difficulty and everything, but nothing worked. And the game prevents you from proceeding while using cheats, so when I tried to use a mod to force the mission to complete with a victory, I could not proceed to the next mission anyway, unlike in previous Arma titles. I'm literally incapable of completing this game, and even worse, upon googling this, I found even if I had gotten past this bug, there were half a dozen other game-breaking bugs in this mission that I would have to get past. The sad reality is that they will never fix this, and there is no way that I can get my money back or any kind of compensation for being delivered a faulty product such as this. The game is barely playable unless you are okay with smaller render distances, and there's a high chance that you, like me, will never be able to finish the main campaign that you paid for, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. As a smaller side note negative thing about Arma 3, this game is also the biggest milker of the series, and by that I mean this is the most expensive base game of any Arma title. This provides the least amount of content in its base game and expansions, while spooning out the most DLC and just chances to spend money that I have ever seen in this entire series. Most of which provides things that should have been in the base game already, or should have been provided for free later. Story expansions are rare compared to Arma 2, but they're still here. There's only 2 of them though, Apex, which brings you into a jungle-themed, cooperative story-driven experience, and Laws of War, which has you as the cleanup crew after the war, experiencing the aftermaths and horror of it all. Really, I hate the marketing for this game, which is why I will admit I did not personally pay for it. I waited until someone else bought it for me, because as much as I loved Arma, I knew it would be as broken as it is, and the marketing tactics they use on it are straying way too far in the direction of AAA publishers like EA. Overall, there's a lot to say about Arma 3, and that's just off the base game alone. There's countless of hours of fun to be had with the base content, DLCs, and mods, or even whatever you choose to create in the editor. It's a very fun game. The latest in one of my favorite game series of all time. It makes some really bad mistakes though, but it does plenty right. For as many cons as there are to Arma 3, you have to realize just how many pros there are. Otherwise, I wouldn't have played nearly as much of it as I have, nor would I feel like continuing on and playing as much more of it as the official scenarios and modded content can offer me. I feel, even despite its flaws, Arma 3 is one of the most revolutionary games to ever come out, and I really hope to see an Arma 4 that fixes all of these flaws, or at least a large portion of them, and continues to improve on this unparalleled series. Arma 3 itself, though, gets an 8 out of 10 for me. Probably a very generous rating given all of the flaws that it has, but the pros are just so strong, and so many. I can't possibly give this anything lower than an 8, even though I wish I could give it a 10 and that I feel like I should give it a 6. It gets an 8. I totally recommend buying this game if you have any interest in a realistic war game, simulator, or what have you. If anything could have won Game of the Year from me in 2013, then it would have been Arma 3. Hell, I would give it that award every subsequent year to date. Just be aware of its flaws though, because they are prevalent, and some of them may be too much for some people to really find the game worth it. There's just so much huge potential to have fun here with this game though, whether you enjoy the base content, include mods as well, and or play this game with friends, which I didn't touch upon at all, and even though it's such a huge part of this game. There's over 37,000 missions created by the community and on the Steam Workshop for you to download. There's probably even more on Armaholic that never made it to the workshop. There's entire communities dedicated to creating on-the-fly missions to simulate realistic wars and encounters that you can get involved in multiplayer communities. Arma 3 gets a huge thumbs up from me, because there really is something here for everyone, and I mean everyone. I hope this review helped you out. If you'd like to see more of my reviews or other gaming content, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and check out my Res Reviews playlist. I try to keep these coming as fast as I can, while maintaining the highest level of quality I can manage. Thank you so very much for watching. Hopefully I'll see you on the next Res Reviews.